I've given you every opportunity, the best tutors, everything, and still you fail.
I'm trying my best.
The rich son was failing all his high school classes, even though he had tons of money. His angry dad took away his car keys, his phone, and all his special rights. Feeling totally embarrassed, he asked the maid's daughter, who was usually invisible, for help. She showed him one huge secret: how to really look at the world. In the fanciest part of the state, where people measured their wealth by how many private planes they owned and how massive their houses were, lived a young man named Ethan Sterling. He was next in line to take over a giant worldwide business empire. Ethan had absolutely everything anyone could ever want, except for one thing: a reason to care about any of it. At 17, Ethan was crashing hard. He was failing every class he took. Every day, he cared less and less. The teachers at his super expensive school, Northwood Academy, had basically given up on him. His father was getting angrier and angrier, and Ethan himself felt like he might just crumble under the heavy weight of being so bored. He was totally surrounded by gold and wealth, but no one could see how much he was struggling. His name was Ethan Sterling, and the world should have been his, but the one thing he couldn't buy was the thing he needed most: a reason to live. The morning sun crept over the Sterling family's huge lawns. It was a kingdom of perfect green grass, neat hedges, and stone fountains. The light poured into the main dining room, shining on the polished silver spoons and the fancy crystal glasses that were always laid out, but never actually used. At the head of a mahogany table, a table so long it felt empty, Ethan slowly poked at his perfect breakfast. The food was flawless. Ethan felt absolutely nothing. He looked out the window. Beyond the glass was a swimming pool the size of a public park and a huge garage full of his dad's old classic cars. Ethan's own car, a dark blue sports car he'd gotten for his 16th birthday, sat near the front door. He didn't even know its exact model name. It was just a thing, another expensive item in a life full of them, like the fancy watch on his wrist or the private jet that flew him on vacations he never enjoyed. These were just props in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Across the big polished table sat his father, Mr. Sterling Thorne. Mr. Thorne was a man made of pure success and constant hard work. His presence filled the whole huge room. He was cold and powerful, like a statue carved out of stone. His eyes, sharp and focused, quickly moved over his tablet as he checked stock market numbers. He hadn't looked up once since he sat down. He didn't need to. He already knew everything he needed to know about his son. The school had called again yesterday, another F grade. "Algebra, Ethan," Mr. Thorne said. His voice was calm but sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. He never had to shout. His disappointment was a quiet, suffocating pressure that made it hard for Ethan to breathe. How is that even possible? This is a basic subject. It's the foundation of all logic, the heart of business. And you failed it. Ethan just pushed his plate away. "It doesn't matter." "It doesn't matter," Mr. Thorne repeated, the words sounding full of disgust. He finally looked up, and his stare felt like being caught in a sudden cold storm. "Your great-grandfather worked on the docks with his hands and built this empire from nothing. Your grandfather survived a world crisis and built a lasting company. I took a basic shipping idea and turned it into a global network. Our story is about building things, about creating value, and you find it pointless." "It's your story, Dad, not mine," Ethan mumbled, slouching lower in his chair. "Then what is your story, Ethan?" Mr. Thorne asked, leaning forward. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. "So far, it's a story of huge failure and epic laziness. You have access to the smartest tutors in the world. 4 of them quit this year. They all said the same thing. You can learn, but you choose not to." Ethan clenched his teeth. He remembered the last tutor, a nervous man from a famous university. Ethan had spent the whole lesson scrolling on his phone, smiling nastily when the man tried to teach him about an old poem. The man had packed his bag and left without saying goodbye. Why should Ethan even try? What was the point? His future was already planned out. He would inherit the money. A high school grade was just a small note in a book that was already finished. "I don't need school," Ethan said, the confident tone in his voice a thin, shaky shield for the emptiness he felt. "I'll just hire people who did go to school." Mr. Thorne's face turned hard. "That is the most pathetic, empty thing I have ever heard." You are a complete disappointment, Ethan. Not to the family name, to yourself. You just don't know it yet. He folded his tablet, stood up, and fixed his suit. I'm flying to Seoul. I'll be back Sunday. Please try not to make me ashamed of the name you carry while I'm gone. He walked out of the room without a single look back. The silence he left behind felt louder than any argument. Ethan sat there, alone at the giant table, the perfect food growing cold. He was a prince in a palace, but all he felt was the cold stone of a prison. Later that day, Ethan walked slowly through the marble hallways of Northwood Academy. The school was so exclusive that the yearly fee cost more money than most people earned in 5 years. The school badge, a golden lion holding a scroll, was supposed to symbolize wisdom and power. To Ethan, it was a complete joke. His admission hadn't needed a test or an interview. It had just required his father to pay for a brand new computer lab. He walked into his advanced science class 10 minutes late. The teacher, Mr. Jones, stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. "How nice of you to finally join us, Mr. Sterling." Ethan smirked and slid into his seat in the back. He didn't care about the whispers or the stares. Some students were jealous, others hated him. He couldn't tell the difference anymore, and he was too tired to try. He pulled out his phone. The lesson was about how massive the universe is, how stars slowly begin, and the incredible dust that forms planets and people. Mr. Jones spoke with real excitement about space clouds and star power. Ethan looked at his phone screen. Watching a silly video of a dog chasing its tail, it felt more real than the stars. He failed the quiz at the end of the class. He didn't even bother to read the questions. He just drew a small cartoon of a smiling ghost on the paper and handed it in. Mr. Jones looked at it, his face a mix of pity and tiredness, and said nothing. There was truly nothing left to say. The day ended with a meeting in the guidance counselor's office. Mrs. Albright, a kind woman with tired eyes, had been trying to help Ethan for 2 years. "Ethan," she started, folding her hands on her desk. His file was open in front of her. It was thick with notes about failed tests, missing homework, and his rude behavior. "We've reached a crisis point. Your grades are now so bad, you won't even be allowed to graduate. You are officially in the bottom 1% of the entire senior class. Stats are for people who have to try," he said, leaning back in his chair, trying to sound cool. Mrs. Albright's gentle smile disappeared for a moment. "Your father is a great man. He's a leader. Don't you want to make him proud?" "My father respects stock prices and profit, not report cards," Ethan replied. "And what do you respect, Ethan?" she asked, her voice soft but serious. The question surprised him. He opened his mouth to give a smart, sarcastic answer, but no words came out. He respected nothing. He believed in nothing. He was an empty echo of a powerful name. The silence lasted a long time, and for the first time that day, a tiny crack appeared in the thick wall he had built around himself. A cold, quiet feeling of fear crept up his back. "It's not too late," she said, her voice filled with a painful hope. "We can find a way. We just need to find what makes you want to live." But Ethan had no idea what that was. He left her office, feeling the weight of the school's disapproval pressing down on him. He drove his expensive car, not home, but toward the coast. He parked by the ocean and watched the massive waves rise with incredible power, only to crash into useless foam and disappear. It felt like the story of his life, full of possibility, ending in nothing. That evening, the house was quiet. His father was already halfway across the world. The many staff members moved like ghosts. Ethan wandered into the grand library. He ran his hand along the backs of the old leather-bound books. They were just expensive decorations, like the suits of armor in the hall. Then he heard a soft, peaceful humming coming from the far corner of the room. Tucked away in a quiet space near the fireplace was a young girl. She was small, no more than 11 years old. She was sitting on the floor surrounded by a small stack of books, not the expensive ones, but worn paperbacks from the local town library. She was cleaning the baseboards, but her eyes were glued to an open book propped against a chair leg. Ethan barely recognized her. She was the housekeeper's daughter, Maya. Maya was quiet and always invisible until now. He watched her for a moment. She was completely lost in her thoughts. He moved closer, curious. He expected a children's story. Instead, he saw the title, The Stoic's Path to Inner Peace. It was an ancient philosophy book about how to be strong and calm in a difficult world. Ethan froze. He had been told to read that book in his philosophy class. He had found it complicated and impossible, giving up after 3 pages and paying a classmate to write the essay for him. And here was Maya, the housekeeper's daughter, reading it like it was the most natural thing in the world. She must have felt him standing there because she looked up. Her eyes were a clear, stunning blue. There was no fear in them, no amazement at his presence, just a calm, deep curiosity. "Hello," she said softly. "What are you reading?" he asked, feeling awkward and rude. "It's about how to be strong when life is hard," she answered simply, holding up the worn book. "My grandfather said that ideas don't have an age limit. The older the idea, the more people it has helped." "Isn't that a little hard for you?" he asked, the rude words slipping out before he could stop them. She tilted her head. "The words are just the paint. The ideas are the picture. And ideas don't have an age limit." She looked him up and down thoughtfully. "My grandfather used to say that. He said most people wait until they are old to start getting wise, but by then, they're too tired to use it." "Who was your grandfather?" he asked. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "He was a soldier, a sergeant. He said he learned more about life in a muddy trench than most people learn in 100 years of school. He said the most important secret in the world is not a piece of information. It is a way of seeing." She carefully put a small piece of paper in her book and closed it. She stood up, picked up her cleaning cloth, and went back to wiping the baseboards, humming softly again. Ethan was left standing in the middle of his grand, echoing library, feeling more lost and deeply ignorant than ever before. A way of seeing. What did that even mean? He was surrounded by priceless art, by stunning views of the ocean, by every beautiful thing money could buy. He saw everything, but he suddenly felt the terrible feeling that he was the one who was truly blind. The next few days were a blur of the same useless routines, but something was starting to change inside Ethan. The thin shield of his arrogance felt weaker. Then came the terrible turning point. Mr. Thorne returned from Seoul. He called Ethan into the trophy room, the shrine to his success. Mr. Thorne was in a terrible mood. He didn't say hello. He just dropped a thick manila envelope onto the polished table. "From Northwood," Mr. Thorne said, his voice dangerously low. "A full report on your attitude and failure. It seems you've managed to set a new, amazing record for complete underachievement." Ethan didn't look at the envelope. "I told you I don't care about school. That much is clear," Mr. Thorne snapped. "But you will care about this." He pulled Ethan's sleek phone from his pocket and placed it on the table. Next to it, he dropped Ethan's wallet, full of credit cards. Finally, he tossed the car keys onto the pile. They landed with a sharp, metallic sound that echoed in the silent room. "What's this?" Ethan asked, a cold sense of terror creeping over him. "This is the end of the free ride, Ethan. It's finished. No more phone, no more unlimited money, and no more car. These are privileges, and you have proven you have earned exactly 0 of them." Ethan stared at the pile of his confiscated life. A rush of pure panic went through him. "You can't do that. How am I supposed to get to school?" "The same way thousands of other students do," Mr. Thorne replied, his eyes like glass. "The school bus stops at the main road at 6:45 in the morning. Be on it. Don't be late." The bus. Ethan choked on the word. It was a joke. It was social suicide. A sterling heir riding the public bus. "Everyone will see me," he whispered. "Good," his father said. "Let them see you. Let them see that the name Sterling is not a shield for failure. Maybe a dose of public shame is the only lesson that can finally get through your thick skull. You want to act like you have nothing? Fine. Now you do." Mr. Thorne turned and left, his final word hanging in the air like a death sentence. Ethan was left staring at the keys to his freedom, now totally useless. He couldn't breathe. His father hadn't just taken his things, he had taken his entire identity. Without the car, the money, the status, who was he? He was nothing. The next morning was a nightmare of cold shame. He woke before dawn. The massive house felt dark and empty. He dressed in the plainest clothes he could find and walked the long, winding path down the driveway to the main road. The air was cold, and the sky was a grim, unforgiving gray. He stood by the side of the road, hands shoved deep into his pockets, feeling exposed and alone. When the big yellow bus rumbled to a stop, its doors hissing open, Ethan felt 100 pairs of eyes on him. He climbed the steps, avoiding any eye contact, and slid into a cold, empty seat in the back. The bus smelled of diesel fumes and old food. It was the longest 20 minutes of his life. This became his new, horrible reality. At school, the bullying was constant. Marcus, the boy whose father was Mr. Thorne's main business rival, was the worst. "Look, everyone!" Marcus yelled across the cafeteria. "The Prince of Northwood is hanging out with the normal people. How's the ride, Ethan? Did you have to sit next to someone who works for a living?" Ethan would just clench his fists and walk away. The angry, clever words died in his throat. What could he say? It was true. He was a joke. Stripped of his phone and his car, his evenings became long, empty, silent stretches of time. He couldn't escape into a screen. He couldn't drive away from his problems. He was trapped in the huge, quiet house with nothing but his own useless thoughts for company. And it was in this forced silence and emptiness that he started, for the first time, to truly see Maya. He found her one afternoon in the huge kitchen, helping her mother polish the massive collection of silverware. Maya's mother, Mrs. Thompson, was a woman of few words, moving with tired but quick efficiency. Ethan could see the worry lines etched around her eyes. Her job, her way of earning a living, was fragile. He watched as Maya took a tarnished fork and worked on it with a soft cloth. She wasn't just cleaning it, she was observing it closely. "Why do some spots get darker than others?" she asked her mother softly. "It's just tarnish, dear, from the air," Mrs. Thompson replied, focused on her own work. "But it's not the same everywhere," Maya insisted, holding the fork up to the light. "It's darkest in the tiny carved parts because the air gets stuck there the longest. It's like a grudge, Mom. If you don't clean out the small, hidden places, that's where the bitterness settles and makes the whole thing black." Ethan stood in the doorway, shocked by the simple, deep idea. He had looked at silver 1,000 times and seen only forks. She looked at it and saw a lesson about human nature. His pride was finally so beaten down that he had nothing left to lose. He needed help, and the counselors, the tutors, and his father had all failed him. This strange, quiet girl with the old soul was his absolute last chance. Ethan found Maya later that week in the sunroom, not reading, but drawing quietly in a small notebook. He walked over, his heart beating nervously. "Hi," he said. She looked up, her expression calm and unreadable. "Hello, Ethan." He swallowed hard. "That thing you said about your grandfather, about a way of seeing, what did you mean by that?" She closed her sketchbook and looked right into his eyes, her blue gaze seeming to see straight through his useless defenses. "Why do you want to know?" "Because," he struggled for the words, "I think I'm blind. I look at everything and I don't see anything real. I listen and I don't hear. I'm failing everything, Maya, not just school, everything." The confession came out in a raw, broken whisper. It was the most honest thing he had said in years. Maya was silent for a long moment, studying his face. Her mother, who had been dusting, stopped and looked over, a worried expression on her kind face. Maya held up a hand, a small, subtle gesture that stopped her mother from stepping in. She focused her full attention back on Ethan. "My grandfather, Sergeant Elias Peterson, was a scout in the war," she said, her voice low and serious. "His job was to go into the enemy territory alone. He had to see things no one else could, not just to look at a forest, but to see which branches were broken, to see which rocks had been moved, to see the story of what happened there. His life and the lives of his whole company depended on it." She leaned forward slightly. "He taught me that most people live their whole lives on the surface. They see the car, but not the engine. They hear the words, but not the real reason behind them. This way of seeing, it is about paying attention. It is about understanding the why behind the what." Can you teach me?" Ethan asked, the question feeling heavy and important. "I'll do whatever you say." Maya held his gaze. "I can show you what he showed me, but it is not easy. It will be much harder than any test you've ever failed at school. There are 3 rules." "Anything?" he said instantly. First, she held up one finger. "You have to start from 0. Everything you think you know about success, about your father, about yourself, so forget it. It is just noise. Your old assumptions are a wall." Second, she held up a second finger. "You must do exactly as I say, even if it seems strange or pointless. There is always a reason for the lesson." Third, She looked him straight in the eye, her expression more serious than he had ever seen on anyone, let alone a child. And you have to put your pride in the trash can. It is the heaviest thing you carry, and it is useless. Your pride is the wall you've built between yourself and the world. If you can't get rid of it, you'll never see a thing. Ethan stared at this young girl, who spoke with the wisdom of a general. He felt a flicker of real hope, the first he had felt in a long, dark time. It was a terrifying, exciting feeling. "Okay," he whispered, taking a deep breath. "I'll do it." She nodded once, a quick, definite movement. "Good," she said. "Your first lesson begins now. We will start with the staff clock." Maya led him out to the kitchen hallway, where a simple plastic time clock was mounted on the wall. This was where the staff punched in and out, marking the beginning and end of their long, difficult shifts. "What do you see?" she asked. "A clock, a machine," Ethan said. "No, you see metal and plastic. See the story," she pressed. "For the last week, I want you to write down the exact minute every single person punches out for the day. Don't talk to them. Don't ask. Just watch closely." Ethan felt foolish, but he agreed. For the next week, he stayed near the kitchen, pretending he was getting water, and watched. He wrote down the times in his confiscated notebook. At the end of the week, Maya showed him his notes. "Look at your mother's chief cook, Mr. Jean-Pierre. He is paid by the hour, right?" "Yes," Ethan confirmed. "He is supposed to clock out at 6 p.m., but your notes show that every single day he clocks out at 6:15 p.m., then runs back to the kitchen, cleans for 20 more minutes, and leaves. Why does he do this?" Ethan thought. "He wants to impress my dad, or he's just a perfectionist?" "Those are surface answers," Maya shook her head. "Look deeper. If he is paid until 6 Skursu, why does he wait until 6:15 to clock out, losing 15 minutes of pay every day? He could do the extra cleaning and clock out at 6:35, being paid for the extra time, but he doesn't." Ethan frowned. "I don't know." "He is not losing pay, Ethan. He is protecting himself," Maya explained. "If he clocks out at 6 p.m., he is saying he finished his work on time, but he knows your father might call the kitchen at 6:05 p.m. with a small, last-minute demand. By clocking out at 6:15 p.m., he is signaling to your father's digital record that he was there late, but the extra cleaning he does after 6:15 p.m. is his own free time. He cleans the kitchen after he is off duty because he is saving his boss's reputation, not his own. He chooses to spend his own time making the kitchen perfect, so the risk of your father getting angry is lower." Ethan stared at the clock. It wasn't a timekeeping device. It was a map of one man's fear and one man's careful plan for managing the harsh temper of Mr. Sterling. The simple machine was telling a complicated, silent story of self-sacrifice and stress. The warrior tree. Maya's lessons were never about books or facts. They were about perception, about finding the hidden engine behind the beautiful car. Another day, she took him to the sprawling gardens. They were enormous and perfectly kept, famous for their unique old trees. "Look at the great oak tree," Maya commanded, pointing to a huge ancient oak that stood in the center of the lawn. "I see a very old tree," Ethan said. "Look at its roots," she corrected. "They are thick, hard, and some of them are growing out over the grass, even cracking the edge of the stone path. Why does a tree with unlimited water and perfect soil push its roots out like that?" Ethan crouched down, staring at the hard, muscular roots. "Maybe it needs more space?" "No, it already has all the space it needs," Maya replied. "My grandfather said that the biggest tree has the deepest roots because it has survived the worst storms. Look at the cracks in the roots. That tree has been hit by lightning. It has been cracked by drought. It keeps pushing its roots out not because it needs more, but because it is always preparing for the next disaster. Its entire life is a strategy of unseen preparation. That's what strength looks like, Ethan. It's not just standing tall, it's building protection against the things you can't control." Ethan stayed there for a long time, watching the massive, quiet strength of the tree. He had walked past it 1,000 times, thinking it was just a beautiful piece of scenery. Now he saw it as a silent warrior, a living lesson in resilience. Seeing his father. The most difficult lesson, the one Ethan dreaded, was about his father. Maya led him back to Mr. Thorne's study. It was a room Ethan always avoided, a tomb built to hold only success. "Your father called the school again yesterday," Maya said, her voice gentle. "He asked for another report. He is expecting to hear that you have failed again. Ethan's stomach tightened. There is no progress, he would believe. My grades are still terrible. He's going to be furious. Maybe, Maya said. Or maybe you're only reading the book's title. Look around this room, Ethan. Really look. What do you see? I see proof that I'm a failure, he muttered, his eyes drawn to a magazine cover, showing his father's powerful face. That's your pride talking, she corrected him calmly. Your pride is a mirror. It only shows you a reflection of yourself. I want you to look through the window. Look at him. She pointed to a large frame photograph on the wall. It was a picture of a much younger Mr. Sterling Thorne, standing in a dirty, cluttered rental office. He looked thin, exhausted, and hungry, but his eyes were burning with a fierce intensity Ethan had never seen before. There was no tailored suit, no powerful CEO. It was just a young man with a dream fighting to survive. This was his first real office after the garage, Maya said softly. He worked 18 hours a day. He slept under that desk. He put every single dollar he had into this company. He was always running from something. She then pointed to the small old photograph tucked away on a bookshelf, the one with the stern grandfather pointing at the report card. That was his father, Maya explained. He was a hard man who believed that love had to be earned. He taught your father that his value was tied to his achievements. They weren't given for free. Ethan stared at the photos. He had seen them before, but he had never seen them. He had seen them as chapters in the great Sterling legend. Now he saw them as pieces of a person who was once young, scared, and desperate to prove he was worthy of love. He looked around the room again. He saw the awards not as weapons used to measure his own failures, but as the scars from his father's long, lonely battles. He wasn't looking at a powerful king anymore. He was looking at the story of a man, a brilliant, driven, and deeply flawed man who was terrified of failure because failure meant he was unloved. He doesn't push you because he's disappointed in you, Maya whispered, as if reading his mind. He pushes you because he is terrified for you. He doesn't know any other way to show you that he cares. He thinks the only way to protect you is to make you as hard as he is. The realization hit Ethan hard, like a physical blow. All the anger and hatred he had held for his father began to disappear, replaced by a painful, aching empathy. His father wasn't a monster. He was a prisoner locked in a cage built by his own harsh father, and he had passed that cage down to Ethan. That evening, Mr. Thorne came home late, looking tired and stressed. He walked past Ethan in the hallway with barely a nod. The old Ethan would have yelled at him for the disrespect. The new Ethan saw the deep weariness in his father's eyes and the slight slump in his shoulders. He took a deep breath. "Dad." Mr. Thorne stopped and turned, his expression impatient. "What is it, Ethan? I have calls to make." I saw that old photo of you in the little office," Ethan said, his voice unsteady. "It must have been very difficult, starting with nothing." Mr. Thorne was stunned. He stared at his son, waiting for the mocking joke, but it never came. He just saw a genuine, quiet curiosity. A strange, unreadable expression crossed Mr. Thorne's face. The hard lines around his mouth softened for just a fraction of a second. "It was a different time," he said, his voice rough, but without its usual cold edge. He paused, as if he wanted to say more, but the habit of a lifetime was too strong. He simply nodded briefly and continued down the hall. It wasn't a big moment. It wasn't a conversation that fixed everything, but it was a start. It was a single, true note in a lifetime of noise. For the first time, Ethan hadn't been talking to the CEO. He had been talking to his father, and for the first time, his father had heard him. Ethan stood in the hallway, a sense of quiet wonder washing over him. He hadn't passed a test or earned a grade, but he had seen something real. He had connected, and it felt more valuable than anything he had ever owned. Finding the bridges Ethan's change was not a sudden burst of fireworks. It was a slow, quiet sunrise. The lessons in the garden and the kitchen began to change the rest of his life, coloring everything with a new layer of meaning. He started taking the school bus not with a feeling of shame, but with a feeling of quiet observation. He noticed the tired mother of 3 in the front seat, her brow furrowed with worry as she counted crumpled bills. He saw the 2 teenage boys in the back, who always acted tough, but whose laughter never quite reached their eyes. He started to see the people around him, not as background figures in his own movie, but as the main characters of their own complex stories. This new way of seeing began to change his view of school. He walked into his history class, the one his father had so harshly criticized him for failing, and for the first time, he actually listened. Mr. Davidson, the teacher, was lecturing about the Industrial Revolution. Before, Ethan would have heard a dry, boring list of dates and inventions. Now, he heard a story of desperation and brilliance. A story of families leaving their farms for the promise of a better life, only to find themselves trapped in the gears of a new, relentless machine. Mr. Davidson put a photograph on the projector. It showed a group of grim-faced factory workers, their faces smudged with soot, their bodies slumped with exhaustion. As you can see, Mr. Davidson said, the conditions were harsh, long hours, low pay. It was a difficult time for the working class. From the back of the room, Marcus snorted. They look miserable. They should have just gotten a better job. The old Ethan would have agreed or stayed silent. The new Ethan felt a surge of something else, a need to correct the simple surface view of the story. He raised his hand. Mr. Davidson looked up, his surprise so evident it was almost funny. Yes, Mr. Sterling? They couldn't just get a better job, Ethan said, his voice clear and steady. The entire class turned to look at him. There were no better jobs. Look at their hands. They're rough, calloused. The man in the middle, his shoulders are slumped. It's not just from a long day. It's the weight of knowing that this is it. This is his entire life. And the boy on the left, he can't be more than 12. He's not looking at the camera. He's looking at the man next to him. He's seeing his own future in that man. A stunned silence fell over the room. Marcus stared at him, his mouth open. Mr. Davidson slowly lowered his pointer. He was looking at Ethan not as a failure, but as a student. That is an exceptionally thoughtful analysis, Ethan. Thank you. Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest. It was a feeling far more satisfying than any expensive car or watch. It was the feeling of being seen and understood for his own effort. He started applying Maya's methods to everything. In literature class, he stopped trying to memorize the symbols and started trying to understand the author's pain, their joy, their deep reason for telling the story. In physics, he stopped seeing formulas on a page and started seeing the elegant, invisible laws that govern the universe, from the path of a baseball to the orbit of a planet. His grades began to change, not quickly, but slowly, steadily. An F became a D. A D became a C-. It wasn't a miracle. It was hard work. For the first time in his life, Ethan was genuinely trying. He stayed late in the library. He asked questions in class. He stopped being a spectator in his own education and started being a participant. His father noticed, of course. Mr. Thorne noticed everything. He saw the improved progress report from the school, but he was suspicious. He saw it not as progress, but as a trick, another one of Ethan's schemes. "What is this, Ethan?" Mr. Thorne asked one evening, holding the interim report. "Did you finally decide to pay someone to take your tests for you? Because these grades, while still terrible, are slightly less terrible than usual." "I'm just trying," Ethan said, refusing to let his father's doubt extinguish his newfound spark. "Trying isn't good enough," Mr. Thorne shot back. "Results are the only thing that matters. You have final exams in 3 weeks. They will determine whether you graduate. They will determine whether this little experiment in riding the school bus comes to an end. Do not disappoint me again." The pressure was huge. The final exams were a mountain he had to climb. And he knew he couldn't do it alone. The mind map. Ethan went to Maya. He found her in the sprawling, warm greenhouse, carefully tending to a collection of delicate flowers. "He doesn't believe me," Ethan said, the frustration clear in his voice. "I'm finally doing the work, and he thinks it's a scam." Maya didn't look up from her task. She gently misted the leaves of a pale white flower. "It doesn't matter what he believes," she said. "It matters what you do. His opinion is just the weather. It changes. Your actions are the ground you stand on. Make it solid." "But how? 3 weeks isn't enough time to learn a whole year's worth of material," Ethan argued. "You don't need to learn it," she said, finally turning to look at him. "You already know it. The information is in the books, in your notes. What you need to learn is how to connect it. History, science, literature, they're not separate islands. They're all part of the same continent. You just need to find the bridges." Her idea of studying was completely different from anything he had ever done. They didn't use flashcards or practice tests. Instead, She had him create a giant, sprawling mind map on a huge whiteboard in the unused ballroom of the mansion. They started with one single important event, the invention of the steam engine. Your history book says it was invented in 1712, Maya said. That's a fact. It's dead. Let's make it alive. Why was it built then? Ethan thought for a moment. The factories needed more power, but that power had to be put in a small space so it could be put on a ship or a train. Good, she nodded. That's the engineering bridge. Now, what about the math? What new formulas were invented to make sure the engine wouldn't blow up? They had to calculate the pressure of the steam, right? Yes, the laws of thermodynamics, Ethan answered, the pieces starting to click together. Math and physics made it safe. The science bridge, she said, drawing lines on the whiteboard, connecting engineering to math. Now, what about the people? What did the steam engine do to society? It put thousands of men who used to work on rivers and roads out of a job, Ethan said, remembering the photos from class. They were angry. They had to move to the cities. It created poverty and huge wealth at the same time. The social bridge, Maya said, her voice soft. And what stories came from that? What novels were written about the terrible, crowded life in the new cities? What poems were written about the quiet death of the countryside? The literary bridge, Ethan finished, a deep sense of understanding dawning on him. For 3 weeks they filled the whiteboard. Every event, every formula, every character in a novel was a dot on the map, and they connected them. The rise of the stock market was connected to the psychology of fear and greed. The structure of a poem was connected to the mathematical beauty of the golden ratio. Everything was part of one large, interconnected story. He wasn't just memorizing facts anymore, he was understanding the world as a whole. During one of their late-night sessions, Ethan's curiosity about Maya's own story became too strong to ignore. Your grandfather, he began carefully. Sergeant Peterson, how do you know so much about what he thought? Did he just tell you stories? Maya grew quiet. She walked over to her small backpack and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. The corners were frayed, and the pages were yellowed with age. She opened it and handed it to Ethan. The handwriting inside was small and precise. It was filled with sketches of plants, maps of wartime territory, and detailed philosophical observations. It wasn't just a soldier's logbook. It was a philosopher's journal. One entry read, "The world is full of people who are too loud to see and too busy to feel. I saw a bird yesterday try to build a nest in a tree that had already been split by a shell. The tree was useless, but the bird did not complain. It found a different tree. Nature does not understand giving up. It only understands moving forward." Another entry read, "The captain tells us to hate the enemy, to see him as a savage. But when I look through my binoculars, I see a young boy no older than my own son, shaking while he cleans his rifle. He is probably just as scared as I am. The most dangerous weapon in any war is not a gun. It is the story we tell ourselves about the other side." Ethan looked up from the journal, his throat tight with emotion. He wrote this in the middle of a war? Maya nodded. He believed that the only way to survive the ugliness of the world was to search for its hidden beauty. The only way to fight hatred was to search for understanding. He didn't fight for a flag. He fought for the idea that even in the darkest of places, there was a better way to see. She revealed then that her great-grandfather had been given the nation's highest military honor, not for a single act of amazing bravery, but for his constant, uncanny ability to anticipate the enemy's moves, to see patterns no one else did, saving his company from ambush on 3 different times. He wasn't a hero because he was a great soldier. He was a hero because he was a great thinker. He said the world was broken, Maya said, her voice barely a whisper, and the only way to fix it was to raise a generation of people who knew how to see. Not just to look at the broken pieces, but to see how they could fit back together again. Ethan finally understood. Maya wasn't just a bright little girl. She was a legacy. She was the keeper of a secret trust, a wisdom passed down from a war-torn trench, a secret she was now sharing with him. The hardest test. The day of his first final exam, history arrived. He walked into the classroom, feeling strangely calm. He looked at the essay question that would have terrified him a month ago. Discuss the primary economic, social, and political factors that led to the Great Depression. He picked up his pen. He didn't just write about the stock market crash of 1929. He wrote about the fragile psychology of a nation built on credit. He wrote about the Dust Bowl, connecting meteorological events, science, to the mass migration of desperate families, social. He wrote about the songs of the time, the photographs, the literature, humanity. He didn't just answer the question. He told the entire connected story. He was the last one to finish. He handed his paper to Mr. Davidson, who looked at him with a curious, hopeful expression. Ethan walked out of the room, not knowing if he had passed or failed. But for the first time, it didn't matter. He hadn't done it for his father or for the grade. He had done it for himself. He had taken the broken pieces of the past, and he had made them whole. He knew with a quiet certainty that nothing in his life would ever be the same. The 2 weeks of exams passed in a focused rush. He walked out of his final exam, physics, feeling not tired, but energized. He had no idea what his final grades would be, but he felt a deep sense of accomplishment that was entirely new to him. He found Maya in the library shelving books. He didn't have to say a word. She looked at him, and a slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. "You did it," she said. "It wasn't a question." "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but I feel different. Like, I just woke up." "That was the only test that mattered," she replied, putting an old copy of a classic novel back on the shelf. "You are blind." The official results were sent to his father first. A week later, Mr. Thorne summoned Ethan to his study. The room felt different now, less like a courtroom and more like a complicated, troubled man's private sanctuary. Mr. Thorne was sitting behind his enormous desk, holding a single sheet of paper. His face showed nothing. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "I spoke with the headmaster at Northwood this morning," Mr. Thorne began, his voice flat. He slid the paper across the polished desk. "This is your final report card." Ethan picked it up with a trembling hand. He scanned the grades. History B+, English B, Economics C+, Physics B. He had passed. He had passed every single class. He had climbed from the absolute bottom to the respectable middle in just a few short weeks. He had done the impossible. He looked up at his father, expecting, what? Praise? A smile? He got none of it. Mr. Thorne leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold and narrow. "It's a remarkable improvement," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "So remarkable, in fact, that it is impossible. No student goes from barely passing to this level in a single semester. No one." The air went cold. "What are you saying?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm saying you cheated," Mr. Thorne said, the words landing like heavy stones. "I don't know how you did it. I don't know who you paid or what strings you pulled, but this is not the work of an honest student. This is the work of a con artist. And while I can put up with a fool, I will not put up with a cheat in my house." Ethan stared at him, his mind reeling. It was the worst possible irony. For the first time in his life, he had done something honestly, with his own grueling effort, and his father was accusing him of lying. The injustice of it was so deep, it stole his breath. All the old anger and resentment came roaring back. "You're wrong," Ethan said, his voice shaking with a mix of fury and pain. "You're wrong. I did the work. I learned how to see it. How dare you?" "Don't lie to me," Mr. Thorne thundered, slamming his fist on the desk. "You've been a disappointment your entire life, but this is a new low. To lie so boldly to my face? Did you think I was that stupid?" In that moment, something inside Ethan snapped. The fear he had always felt was burned away by the white-hot fire of his anger. But Maya's lessons held. He didn't just see a tyrant. He saw the scared man in the old photograph. He saw a man so blinded by his own rigid definition of success that he couldn't recognize real, honest growth when it was right in front of him. "No," Ethan said, his voice suddenly calm and clear. His rage settled into a core of absolute certainty. "I think you're blind, Dad. You've spent your whole life looking at balance sheets and stock prices, and you've forgotten how to read a person. You look at me, and you don't see a son. You see a bad investment. You've been so obsessed with teaching me the cost of everything that you never taught me the value of anything." He placed the report card back on the desk. "I didn't do this for you," he said, the words ringing with a newfound authority. "I did this for me. And frankly, whether you believe me or not is your problem, not mine. I don't need your approval anymore. I am not a line item on your ledger." He turned and walked out of the study, leaving Mr. Thorne speechless for the first time in his life. He left his father sitting alone in his temple of success, a powerful king, suddenly and utterly powerless. The real story. Ethan found Maya sitting on the steps of the back porch, watching the last bit of the sun disappear. Her mother, Mrs. Thompson, was nearby, packing her bag to go home for the evening. "He didn't believe me," Ethan said, sitting down beside her. The anger had faded, leaving behind a hollow ache. "I know," Maya said softly. Mrs. Thompson looked at Ethan, her eyes full of a sympathy that was almost unbearable. "I'm sorry, Ethan. He's a hard man to please." "It doesn't matter," Ethan said, trying to convince himself as much as them. "I'm done trying to earn it." He looked at Maya, at this incredible girl who had completely changed the course of his life. "How can I ever repay you?" Maya looked not at him, but at her mother. A silent, meaningful glance passed between them. It was Mrs. Thompson who finally spoke, her voice hesitant but firm. "There is one thing, Ethan. A favor. A huge debt," Mrs. Thompson said, her gaze dropping to her hands. "It was never just about your grades." "Anything," Ethan said instantly. "It's about my brother," Mrs. Thompson began, her voice cracking slightly. "Maya's uncle, Mr. Thomas. He worked for your father's company for 20 years. A senior programmer, a very loyal man. A few years ago, there was a terrible security breach, a big one. Millions of dollars were lost. Your father needed someone to blame quickly, to protect the stock price." Maya picked up the story, her voice tight with years of stored-up pain. "They blamed him? They said he sold company secrets. Your father fired him, ruined his name completely. No one else would hire him. We lost everything. That's why my mother has to work 2 jobs. That's why we had to sell our house." "But he was innocent," Mrs. Thompson insisted, a fierce conviction in her voice. "My brother would never do something like that. He loved that company. But your father, he needed a quick answer, a scapegoat. He didn't look at the evidence, he just looked at the bottom line." And then Ethan understood. He finally saw the whole picture, the final heartbreaking connection on the map. This wasn't just a random act of kindness. This was a daughter's quiet, brilliant, desperate plan to get close enough to the heart of the Sterling Empire to save her family's honor. "The secret," Ethan whispered, the pieces falling into place with a terrible clarity. "The way of seeing. Your great-grandfather taught it to you, and you taught it to me so that you could see the truth," Maya finished for him. "So you could show your father what he refuses to see. The real story isn't always the easiest one to read." The weight of it all settled on Ethan. The moral challenge he had only read about in books was now his own. His loyalty to the father who had paid for his life versus his debt to the girl who had saved him. But it wasn't even a choice. He knew what he had to do. His purpose had just been handed to him. The final connection. Ethan spent the next 2 days locked in the Grand Library, not with textbooks, but with old company reports, archive network logs, and financial statements he accessed using his father's old passwords. He applied Maya's methods. He didn't look for a single piece of evidence that cleared Mr. Thomas. He looked for the story the data was hiding. He looked for the gaps, the things that didn't match up, the moments where the official story didn't quite line up. He searched for the movement that was too quick, the order that was too clever, the pattern that broke the normal flow of business. He found it. A digital trail, a series of encrypted transfers cleverly disguised as regular software updates. The trail did not lead to Mrs. Thompson's brother. It led to a senior executive on the board, a man who was a fierce rival of his father's, a man named Mr. Marcus Sr., the father of the boy who had mocked him for riding the bus. It was a digital coup, a brilliant act of corporate sabotage, and Maya's innocent uncle had been the perfect person to blame. Ethan printed everything. He organized it into a clear, undeniable timeline. He took the thick folder and walked back into his father's study. Mr. Thorne was staring out the window, looking old and tired. Ethan didn't say a word. He just placed the folder on the desk. Mr. Thorne looked at it, then at Ethan, his eyes full of suspicion. He opened it and began to read. Ethan watched as his father's face went through a storm of emotions. Confusion, then irritation, then a dawning comprehension. and finally, a deep, soul-shaking shock. The mask of the powerful CEO fell away, revealing the face of a man who had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. He had ruined an innocent man's life, not because he was evil, but out of pride and haste, out of a willful blindness. He looked up at Ethan. The arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was a raw, painful vulnerability. "You found this?" Mr. Thorne stammered, his voice broken. "How?" "I learned how to see," Ethan said simply. A long silence filled the room. Then, for the first time Ethan could remember, he saw tears well up in his father's eyes. "What have I done?" Mr. Thorne whispered. It was the beginning of a long, difficult road. Maya's uncle was publicly and completely cleared. Mr. Thorne offered him his job back with a promotion and a generous payment that restored his family's security and honor. But more than that, Mr. Thorne offered him a quiet, heartfelt apology, man to man. It was an act of humility that reshaped the entire Sterling family story. Ethan did not return to Northwood Academy. He chose instead to attend the local public high school, where he graduated with honors a year later. He and his father began to talk, really talk. They didn't always agree, but they listened to each other. They were not just a CEO and an heir anymore. They were a father and a son rebuilding a broken bridge, piece by painful piece. Mr. Thorne, slowly and awkwardly, was learning to see his son not as a reflection of his own success, but as a person. One evening, Ethan found Maya in the garden, reading by the light of the rising moon. "My uncle wants to thank you," she said. "He said you gave his name back to him." "You're the one who did that," Ethan said. "You're the one who taught me. Why me, Maya? Out of everyone, why did you choose me?" She closed her book and looked up at him, her startlingly wise blue eyes reflecting the moonlight. "My grandfather told me something else," she said. "He said, you can't fix a broken world by fighting the people who broke it. You have to teach their children how to see, because they are the only ones who can convince the kings that their castles are built on sand." Ethan looked out at the sprawling estate, at the perfectly manicured lawns and the glittering lights of the mansion. It was a kingdom built on wealth and power, but he knew now that its greatest treasure was not in the vault or the garage. It was an 11-year-old girl who knew that the most powerful secret in the world was simply the courage to truly open your eyes and see the story of people. And that lesson had finally saved him.